Okay, Brazos County Commissioner will meet in a workshop session. It's May the 19th, 1:30, ARPA Commissioners Courtroom, County Administration Building, 200 South Texas Avenue, Suite 106. The first item is call to order, and the second is presentation and discussion by Melinda Smith, Wesley Traylor, and Mark Traylor with Traylor Associates. Who wants to start out?
I'll start it out, Judge.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you and the commissioners today giving us this opportunity. And we hope that y'all are as ready to move forward with these funds as we are. We're ready to get it on down the road. With that being said, where are we at with the funds? What needs to happen next? Where do we need to go with the funds? At this point in time, we have requests for funding we have 48 individual requests. Some of those came from the county itself, some of them came external. Combined best projection on those, some of those requests do have a dollar amount, some of those do not. And so we took a best guess just to give y'all some round numbers on it. We do feel that we were conservative with those numbers, but those 48 requests are north of $140 million. So 140 million plus as high as you want to go with it in some instances. Compared to the funds you have, we got to do some cutting back. And that's the intent of today's workshop. We'd like to visit with y'all. We've got some information we'll be going over with you. We've got some sheets in front of you. Just to real quickly give you an overview of what we're looking for today, if you will, try to picture a file cabinet. What we're looking for today is each of the drawers within that file cabinet. We want y'all's assistance in labeling those drawers. And then the folders that go within that drawer, we want y'all's assistance in labeling those folders as well. We provided you the options to choose from on it. All of these 48 requests will fit within these options here. It's going to be up to y'all to choose if you want to use all of these options or not. If you don't, then you've got a drawer that doesn't have a folder in there, which basically what that means is you've got a request that you feel at this point in time doesn't fit with the county's needs and the goal of the ARPA funds. Once we go through this exercise, and we all know it's going to have to be some give and take to it, what our goal with this is to be able to come back to you next week and say, based on the criteria that was established this afternoon, we have gone back, we have put each of these requests in a folder. Now let's start with the top drawer, the folder that's at the front of it, and we will go through these requests, solicit your input on that, determine what you want to go forward with to Commissioner's Court and what you want to pull out of that folder at this point in time. Hopefully it'll be an organized process. Hopefully it will help you in taking smaller bites rather than trying to eat this whole elephant in one bite. And hopefully we can get you well down the road with it within the next couple of weeks. It's our intention to be able to bring this information to Commissioner's Court for y'all to make a determination on. With that being said, Melinda, would you like to come up and provide a little more information?
Certainly. So, if you get the feeling that we're asking you to go into this blindly, we are. And there's a reason behind that. Rather than present you with the projects individually today, we want to make sure that we are providing the county an avenue to prioritize based on the needs of the county and the needs of the program and meet all of the requirements. We want to also provide an avenue to ensure that the projects are being selected fairly and equitably. Within the ARPA guidance, there is language sprinkled throughout every single section that deals with ensuring that there are fair housing requirements that are considered. You'll see on the board the QCT, that's a qualified census tract. That's an area that the federal government has determined to be disproportionately impacted due to its demographics. We have to consider those as well. We have to consider minority and female-owned business enterprises and residents in everything that we consider. Now, that does not mean that decisions must be made based on those factors, but it's things that we want to make sure are included in the decision-making process. To help do that, we want to make sure y'all are prioritizing activities or organizational type. Everything, as Mark said, is going to fit into one of these categories, And it's really going to be more of a combination of both. You're going to be selecting either to prioritize the activity itself and then who performs those activities, or the organization and then the types of activities they perform. Our goal at the end of today is to have that portion taken care of at a minimum, and if possible, also assign a dollar value to those categories. If public health ends up being the number one priority that y'all see here in Brazos County, then, we want to know, how big of a priority is that? You have $44 million. Is that $40 million that you want to spend, or is it $5 million in that category? Next week, we'll then explore how these funnel into each category, if there is a dollar amount predetermined, what's inside that dollar amount, what's outside of it, and this is not signed in blood. That's still going to be up to the court to determine each project at the end of the day, which one is funded and which is not. But it gives us a means to list them in an organized manner to present them to you for consideration. Some may fall out of the pot, as Mark also stated before, based on just really not seeing the need for that. There's other avenues for funding that someone could explore, or just truly not something that the court deems a priority at this time. We can always revisit all of these later on as well. But for now, it gets us started. We want to get funds moving. We want to get funds used. It is time to start requesting the second tranche if you haven't done that yet. We need to make sure that happens. Funds should be on their way by around June 1st if that request is made this month. So we want to start spending it. That's what it's there for, and that's what we're here to do today, is help figure out what the best course of action will be, best path forward of expending these in a way that meets y'all's needs. So just to go over, sorry, I moved away. Just to go over a little bit about the categories themselves. Did you want me to go ahead and keep going, or anybody else? Okay. I tend to just keep talking, so if y'all have any questions, I do this every day. Sometimes I forget that not everybody does. So if I use an acronym or a term that y'all don't understand or question, please let me know. Again, sometimes I forget that not everybody deals with this day in and day out.
Melinda, on the
yes, sir.
qualified census tract, can you explain just a little bit why that's important to what we're doing here today?
Certainly. The ARPA guidelines and Federal Register state that all projects that are located within a qualified census tract, which is one that is going to be densely populated by either a lower income population, minority, elderly, some vulnerable population, has been deemed disproportionately impacted. So in other words, this population feels the burden more than any other of the pandemic itself. By default, any project located within a QCT is going to be determined to be eligible because it's serving a disproportionately impacted population. It is the focus of the first paragraph of pretty much every category that you see. Anytime you talk about it in the ARPA guidelines, the first thing out of there is going to be, and don't forget to, to consider your qualified census tracts. Again, it doesn't have to be the decision maker that automatically, oh, this project serves this population. We must do it, but you do need to be cognizant and aware that particularly there are agencies out there that if you Google a few of these things, one of the first things that's going to come up is community activists and organizations that are watching these funds very closely. And we just don't want, at the end of the day, to have missed that we have a project in the qualified census tract, we didn't consider it properly, and then someone else come up and have some sort of standing to say that there was any sort of discrimination, that it was overlooked in any way.
I understand.
Okay. So, a little bit about the activities themselves. these are just very brief definitions that you have in front of you of the expenditure categories. This is not inclusive of all of the categories. First of all, there are some that, based on our one-on-one conversations and previous meetings with the court, have been knocked off the list that no one seemed to be, supporting and did not find already to be a need for the community. For those that remain, this is also not an all-inclusive list. There are a lot of gray areas where things fit in. There are a lot of areas that after using, for instance, the government services, things that aren't typically funded in other categories can then fall into some of them at the end of the day. But to start, let's just go over the basic umbrella that each one's going to capture and what the main considerations will be. This is also not necessarily reflective of the requests that we have in hand. So I just want to make sure y'all understand this is just a broad definition of each of these. So for public health, the subcategories are things that are basically medical necessities, vaccination, testing sites, PPE, any kind of medical expenses that you might have in relation to the pandemic. Communications, that's going to include also broadcast of vaccination or infusion site information, whether it's social media, billboards, what have you. Enforcement of the pandemic policies, especially during shutdown. Assistance to small businesses, nonprofits, and impacted industries. Community violence intervention, there's also a big push to use alternate sources of policing our communities through this and cut down on violence before it occurs. Behavioral health, which we all know is very important, and we saw a amplification, I think, of behavioral health and mental health issues during the pandemic, people who were secluded and not getting out as much as they did, and then other public health services. And anytime you see other on here, please note, it is very broad. But it is incumbent upon us to find how it meets a need and what need it is addressing if we put something in an other category. Negative economic impacts is going to include household assistance, individual assistance, things of the nature of alleviating food insecurities, things like that. Assistance to small businesses, assistance to nonprofits, and then aid to impacted industries, which could include hotels, tourism, parks, recreation, things like that. And then again, we have other. Infrastructure, water, and sewer is just as it sounds. Now that does also include some drainage projects in the water and sewer. They include stormwater in that now. We do have some, a little bit more leeway since the final rule was published. I think we all talked about that last time we were here. And then we have infrastructure, broadband, and then government services. Government services is the back end use to our revenue loss. Currently, the county is projecting around $34 million in revenue loss from fiscal year 20 to 23. I believe that's correct. Okay. I should make sure I was using the correct years there. And we do still have to account for the use of those funds. So it is not free money. It is not completely green money. We do still have to be able to identify its use. There are some exclusions to those funds being used for pensions, debt repayment, basically anything that is a debt owed by the county in relation to a lawsuit, litigation, anything along those lines. So, are there any questions about what these are before we start talking about maybe how y'all want to look at this and prioritize?
I hate to get down into specifics this early, but I'm just going to ask you a question. Let's say, for example, that there was a consensus that we would give Road and Bridge the money that they'd asked for the stormwater projects, $1 million or something like that. Would that be better to come out of the 34 mil in revenue loss, or would it be better that we specifically assign ARP money to that?
So there are two ways of thinking on this, and I'll tell you which one we prefer. But the first is that anything that comes under the government services after claiming revenue loss, as of today, in our first reporting period for the both interim report and then also our first quarterly report, the reporting and requirements for the information that must be obtained for those projects is far less stringent than if we are spending it out of these other categories. That's as of today. Everything in our guidance that tells us, hey, we have streamlined reporting for now, has that caveat for now. We don't know what's coming in the next round of guidance. They have updated this multiple times already. We don't know if they're just trying to figure out a way to put it in the system. We don't know if they're trying to figure out, does this work or doesn't. We really don't have a lot of information on why it says this. Well, for today, just put this in here. Therefore, our recommendation, though it is not the easy road, is to, when something fits into another category, go ahead and use it in another category. It is a little bit more work on our part. It's probably not a lot more work on the county's part other than just making sure we have that information. But we know it protects you in the future. And that's again, a big part of this is making sure that we are not just complying, but documenting the compliance as we go. But there's also those items that won't have any other place to go but that government services. So do keep that in mind as well as we move forward, that if that's a priority, it's going to be after the revenue losses claims and really only have that space to fit. And that's mostly going to be roads and sidewalks and a couple projects like that. So.
Okay, we're estimating the revenue loss, but we don't know that until the end of '23, correct?
Correct.
Okay. We have to have projects identified and funding for those projects identified by the end of '24, and they have to be, the expenditures have to be made by the end of '26.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we don't necessarily have to, if there are some things that we want to explore and they're still conditioned upon getting information in the form of studies as far as things that would apply for public health, we don't necessarily have to have the whole list done and firm at this point. If we've got some contingencies where we want to look at whether we can use that money for that or not, based on what we get as far as reports on studies that we're doing for different types of potential projects.
That is 100% correct.
Okay.
Yeah, not every decision has to be made today, but we need to make some and get
Right.
something moving. But, you know, if y'all want to reserve any amount for the possibility of a future project, or in case something else comes up between now and then that's always a possibility as well. I mean, we've got a board that's erasable over here for that purpose. As y'all discuss it, we will, you know, write anything on there that needs to be and erase it if you change your mind, so.
Okay. So what do we have proven to be lost revenue of what we've received so far?
Oh. I was gonna say it was 6
Okay.
and 8, wasn't it, I think, on the, yeah.
Okay. So we've got 14 million that we're good on. We already have proven that that's, okay.
So that amount is currently freed up for government services.
All right. And we'll know the next amount at the end of this, is it calendar year or our year? Calendar year.
Fiscal
Okay.
year.
Calendar year or fiscal year?
Fiscal year.
I'm hearing an answer that says calendar year here.
We had a choice, and we went with, we stuck with calendar year.
Okay, so,
I think I mistakenly said fiscal year a moment ago. It was calendar year 20 through 23. Okay.
okay, so that at the end of calendar year 23, we'll know the total amount,
Yes.
correct? Okay, thank you.
We ready to start writing on the board? You should each have in front of you a paper copy, more or less, of this that I'm going to be using over there. I'm going to let Mark or Wesley jump up here so they can visit as I write. So, and we can start with just a couple of mock scenarios if you'd like, just to kind of see, make sure everybody has an understanding of what we're going for. Basically, if, do you want me to move this? Okay. Basically, if we started with, we'll start with option A. Say the county decides to prioritize the requests received by county internal requests. This would go in the blank here. And then we would prioritize from there those requests received internally, public health, water. I should add that that includes other public entities on that. I think it's by your sheet. And then, government services. So it's really not, it takes a second, I think, it took us a minute to wrap our head around how can we take what you have in hand, how do they fit in nice, neat little rows and columns, and the honest answer is they don't all fit in nice, neat little columns. The majority of them do fit into these categories. They all fit in somehow. Are they nice and neat? Not necessarily. Not gonna lie about it. But they all do meet the criteria of these either activities or organizational types. So, who wants to?
Kind of going back to the file cabinet scenario, where Melinda has the county written in up there, that is an organizational type. So the file drawers would either be named organizational type or expenditure categories. They would not be both, whichever one y'all choose. So Melinda chose the county, and so going across that row, the others would be nonprofit, individual households, privately owned, if you chose to have a drawer for all of them. You might choose that privately owned businesses, we don't really want to look at this point in time. So one of the drawers would not be named privately owned businesses. Whether you choose organizational type or expenditure categories, once again, the other column would feed down that same column there. And there again, you would not have to choose all of those, as Melinda in the example, she didn't choose all of the expenditure categories under county. You can put them all in there. You can choose whichever one you feel is a priority for the county. Once again, there's a possibility if you don't choose them all, then that particular folder, you could have a request that doesn't fit within this. We're going to bring them all back to you next week. If there are any that do not fit, that Commissioners Court decides we don't want a slot for it at this point in time, we're going to say these are the ones that currently do not fit. Let y'all look those over first, then we will proceed with the ones in the order that y'all have chosen to move forward with. Once again, as Commissioner Aldrich said, you do not have to make a final decision next week. We're just trying to get the ball rolling. We're trying to get a consensus on things that y'all do want to go forward with. Present those to court, get the ball to rolling on it, and start getting some of this money utilized.
And no matter what, this is the county's money to do with as you see fit. We're just trying to help facilitate identifying those priorities and those needs. That all individual requests will still be presented to you. You will still have the opportunity to look at those and say, well, I didn't think about that in the terms of this and where it might fall in, but this is really important to us. But it does get us started down the road of identifying those projects which meet the priorities and program eligibility. we've got to start somewhere, so.
All right, start with a clean slate.
That's what I was gonna say. Let's- So currently you do, like I said, have something that's gonna fit into each of these categories that has been requested. So you do have requests internally, you do have requests from other public entities, nonprofits, privately owned businesses, and then some requests that were made within the county, but would ultimately benefit individuals and households. Public health, negative economic impacts. Your economic impacts is going to include a lot of your nonprofit organization requests, if that's helpful to know. And I think that public health does as well. A lot of them could go either way. Some of them based on what their actual request is for the use, and then some of them based on who benefits from the use of the funds and the services they provide. QCTs, we've got out here on their own. Again, we're going to have to look at those individually regardless of what category they fall into. I don't anticipate you're going to have a lot of them. There's not very many qualified census tracts in the county to begin with. But again, we're going to monitor it, we're going to keep an eye out for it, and make sure that we're bringing those to your attention so that at the end of the day and at the end of the program, no one can come back and say, hey, we had a project here and y'all didn't even talk about it. So.
Your list under B, are those not the broad strokes that we list the categories under?
You can choose either A or B. That's the thing. The file drawers, as Mark said, I mean, that's kind of the best way we can put it. If you choose B as the first means to organize it, as in first we're going to look at all of our, and I'm just going to take public health because it's on top. First we're going to consider everything to do with public health would be here. And then we would switch over to, okay, we're going to first prioritize public health related projects that are sponsored by the county. And then we're going to look at nonprofit organizations and the projects that they've submitted. And then, privately owned businesses. Or if you don't want privately owned businesses, then it wouldn't, and you can skip down to individuals. Or if you don't want to consider anything for individuals that, most individuals could also be served by nonprofits. If you think, well, they can go seek assistance from the people that we are furnishing funds to. It's y'all's money, and they're y'all's projects to sponsor. So it's going to be what's important to y'all to fill these blanks.
We've already identified and committed, and I believe made an expenditure of some of these funds. Is that correct?
I don't think so.
Some of the,
Hub expenditure not covered by a grant.
I'm sorry?
Just the vaccination
The vaccination hub
not covered by another.
that were not covered by another grant. And what was the amount of that?
Like 160.
Okay.
If it's already been spent, then we make it number one on the list, right? I mean, it's,
Yes,
Yeah.
it is number one, it's
Yeah.
already been spent. Yes,
But,
so it's
but,
already been
It's-
considered.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
it's gonna have to
that's
be
the
one of the
reason I
first
asked the
ones.
question. So by default,
I wouldn't even bother putting it on here. 'Cause
Okay.
it's already-
right.
gotcha.
except we can take that off of the 44 million. We're not talking about 44 million anymore, we're talking about 43.8. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Thanks.
I feel like this is a poker game and we're waiting for somebody to open.
All right, so-
Yeah, so I'm gonna open by saying infrastructure, stormwater, and infrastructure broadband.
Okay.
I'll go with public health.
I agree, that was
I'll put government services out there.
That leaves you with negative impact.
Unless we leave that one off the list, I don't know. But we can put it down there, we'll see where we go with it.
Okay, so, and we can shift these around while we have this.
Yeah, I don't think
We
they're
can make
priority.
any changes in what's in a minute, but let's go ahead and go with what we've got so far.
And this is not a prioritization, this
Right.
is just a categorization.
Right. We're not prioritizing these.
In that order necessarily. Should we?
Right.
No, we need to prioritize. We need to,
It's kind of difficult for me without seeing the
The
$140
projects.
million of the 48 requests to be able to prioritize. It's kind of like, I don't know,
Yeah.
I'm a little
Yeah.
lost, I'm a little lost in the rubric, I guess.
Yeah.
so, like I said, I know it feels like we're swinging blinds, and you
Yeah.
are, but there is an intent to that.
They're good.
Right
Yeah, you
now,
explained that
today-
earlier and I'm not sure I picked up on it.
Yeah. I have a
Thanks.
You
question.
didn't believe me when I said it.
Well, I did, and I was listening, and I was glad you said what you said. I said, okay, here it comes, but I'm not sure I'm there.
Okay, I have a question before you answer that. You're going to list all the projects under these categories, correct?
Not today, correct? Yeah.
No, no,
That's
but-
gonna be the next,
The next step is we're going to have all the $140 million worth of projects, the 48 projects, and we're going to put them in these categories, correct? And then we're going to prioritize them within the categories?
yes.
Okay,
We're going to look at them based on the prioritization, and this is gonna give us a way to rank them and present them to you, and this is for today, identifying the
Right.
needs. It's really less about individual projects today and what are the needs. Does, you know, is infrastructure, stormwater, first and foremost the need that needs to be addressed using ARPA funds? And if so, you know, then who has the greatest need? The county, you know, subdivisions, you know, in like privately owned area, you know, well, mostly the subdivisions that y'all don't have ownership of, which.
Well, Linda, if you would, go ahead and just pick one of those organizational types and put it under infrastructure stormwater.
Okay.
All right, so next week, any of the requests for funding that are for infrastructure stormwater that are, my eyes aren't what they used to,
County.
from the county, those are the first things we're gonna present to y'all. Whether it's one funding request, whether it's 5, we're gonna present y'all all of those that fit in that folder and say, here they are, what's y'all's feelings on this? Do you wanna move forward with all of these? In realizing that the dollar amount of these requests and the funds that you have available, do you wanna pick the top 2, the top 3, set the others aside? And we'll do that with every one of these 48 requests. Some of these folders aren't gonna have anything in them. And there again, it could be in some situations, there are requests that aren't gonna fit your priorities that you determined today. But that is not the ultimate priority, that everything is gonna have to fit in this nice, neat little box when we come back to you next week. You're not gonna have to allocate dollars to every single project next week. We just need to try to determine some type of a priority next week so that we can go ahead and start moving forward with some of these projects. Some of this could be feasibility studies that y'all are wanting to have done. That's what some of the requests are. That will give us the leeway to go ahead and get started with the procurement for those specific activities and get those on down the road.
And we know from our discussion, I'm sorry, Judge, go ahead.
Katie wanted to speak.
You can blame it on me. So, what y'all have said today is that stormwater infrastructure is your top priority.
No, I don't
Yeah.
believe we've said that. It was my
Wasn't
top,
your-
To clarify.
okay, it's my top priority. It's still open to discussion for the court.
Just decided next time it's priority one. So do you want to change this order?
And ideally, after we start with this, we're gonna add dollar amounts to this. Ideally, we're gonna say, and we'll go with this for right now, if y'all determine infrastructure stormwater is your #1 priority, and you have $44 million to spend, how much of that do you want to attribute to this category? Do you want to say, okay, that's our biggest priority, but those projects actually don't cost a tremendous amount of money.
Right.
So we want to say $5 million here, and we're going to bring you these stacks of, and we're going to show you, here is your then $2 million, $5 million in projects that are infrastructure stormwater. If the county's projects take up that amount of money that y'all said, I think this is a good idea, then we would stop there. You will still have visibility of what is not making the cut, but it gives us a place to start saying, okay, based on what you've identified as your priorities, here's what would be funded.
Melinda, this is for me only, it's for discussion for the rest of the court. Under stormwater, under infrastructure stormwater, the way I would love to see it prioritized would be the county. And then we've got a water purveyor that's got a request, I think, for an emergency generator or something. I'd like to have that as my next priority under all the county projects. And then I'd also like to have at least on there individuals or households as my third way to prioritize that item.
Okay, so for the county and other public entities, we did include that for that purpose.
Okay,
because
so
you
that's-
have, other,
that's
like water
one.
supply corporations,
Yeah.
SUDs, MUDs, things that meet
Okay.
the qualification
Okay.
here. So
And I
that-
think I'm asking for two priorities. One would be the county and the public entities, and then the other one would be individuals and households.
Right, there you go. So that's what it would look like, and if y'all then in just a few minutes say, okay, we think we want to spend $5 million on stormwater.
Do I get to say what I'd propose for it also? I mean, would that be, I believe for $2 million, we could get that covered. I think it's $1 million for the county projects, about $600,000 for the Water Supply Corporation, and then we've got some private households, if you will, that would be less than $1 million for sure.
And just because it's the #1 priority on here, doesn't mean that it has to have the most money.
Right.
Like I said, I mean, some of these projects, like you said, we've got a dollar amount, and we do have a pretty specific dollar amount on some projects, not necessarily all of them, but again, this will give us a means to show you, based on what we talked about today, next week we're gonna come back and be like, okay, here's where they fall in.
Yeah. Go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
Well, just to say, backing out of this, if we looked at it a different way, we could put the 4 organizational types up there in prioritization, and then use the 5 expenditure categories underneath each of those.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yeah.
Personally, I would prefer that, because I think it puts out where we want to focus on allocating funds entity-wise. So if we were to do that, my thoughts would be is I'd put county other public entities first. I'd put a toss-up between nonprofit organizations. I would say nonprofit organizations, and then privately owned businesses, and then individual household assistance.
Yeah, I would concur with that.
Makes sense.
I would too.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
are we all in agreement on that then? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm actually gonna erase this
Yep.
then.
We're making progress.
We are.
We brought y'all more copies as well, if y'all need to, if the copy you have in front of you.
Yeah, I did notice I had 2 pieces of paper.
Yeah, and we brought you additional, so if you need to start over 3 or 4 times, we're ready for it.
No, we're
No, we're good.
You didn't tell us to bring pencils with erasers, we brought all brought pens.
Yeah.
I think I think that fits
We're
more with
careful
how I
what we're
think about
writing.
Yeah,
So,
The counties,
once again, when we come back next week, we're gonna go to the file cabinet, we're gonna open the top drawer, and the top drawer is labeled county and other
County.
public entities.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna look at the folders in that drawer first, and then we'll look at the others.
So, do you have a list by any chance of what's in each folder now?
No, we're determining what's in
You-
each folder.
yeah.
Next week, we're gonna talk about projects.
Right, you don't have, do you have anything under county and other public entities
Yep, just here.
in a folder now?
Oh, no, no.
We're gonna talk about you.
You talking about the actual requests themselves?
Yes,
No, ma'am, we do not.
okay, so you'll unveil that next week?
Yeah, and there again, Melinda, you wanna give her the condensed version of?
The short story is, we are asking you to, instead of help us swing blindly on purpose. We want to identify the needs for the projects first. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but predominantly it's going to be to make sure that we are distributing money fairly and equitably. And that we are considering, this QCT that's kind of hanging out there on its own.
Right.
Those are qualified census tracts. Those are projects in areas that have already been deemed by the government to be disproportionately impacted and carry a heavier burden.
Okay,
We want to make sure that we're setting up a program for you that we can defend, you can defend, and that if anyone has any issues with how it's distributed,
okay.
we're not looking at individuals, we're not looking at individual requests, we are first looking at community needs.
Great. Okay, I'm on board.
Thank you.
Okay, so inside our county requests then, what are our priorities for those items?
And that'll be what's labeled as expenditure categories on the sheet you have in front of you.
Okay.
Well, I think,
I'm kind of at a
government
toss,
services,
kind of at a toss-up between public health and government services.
yeah,
That'd be me too.
yeah, me too.
I think I would give more weight to public health because that's been an issue. I'm not saying the other categories aren't, but look at COVID-19. I mean, public health, in my view, should weigh high, heavier. But
So are we on the agreement, public health?
I mean, I'm kind of a toss-up too about the government services and public health. I mean, as far as the priority. I mean, they're both important.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are,
No, we can do 1 and 2.
right.
public health should be number one.
I'm good with that. And then government services too.
Yeah, I can go with that.
Well, seeing how our first expenditure has been already made that way, it fits.
Yeah.
We're gonna be consistent. Okay, are any of these other items something that you would like to prioritize or wait and save those for after? Stormwater and water would fall under this one as well?
Yep.
Yes, please.
Well, and the infrastructure broadband.
Broadband, I agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Broadband.
Yeah.
And so that leaves negative economic impacts. Does that
Yeah.
make the list for today, or does it hang on and see what gets cut by not including it right now?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, I'm good with including it in 5th spot.
I think, when we prioritize, it'll eliminate itself.
Yeah,
Okay.
So would negative economic impacts be prioritized above nonprofits?
No.
Well,
Interesting, right?
the hope is to move on down, but if we assign a dollar value, it can go may look at this when we get here, next week with it and go, yeah, this is not what we wanted, and that's okay.
Right.
When you see how the projects individually fall, like I said, there may be projects that you go, oh, I didn't even consider that that's how they would fit in, but I do think this is very important. It's still open to that. But this is gonna give us a start on this prioritization process.
Okay.
Okay.
And that feels good.
Alrighty, so moving on into nonprofits. Same thing with, we have public health, negative economic impacts. Now I will tell you, most all of our NPO projects, just by default of the definition, are gonna fall into either public health or negative economic impacts.
Yep.
Yeah.
Obviously, government services is not going to be in that one.
Yeah.
But technically, for instance, a water supply could be considered an NPO over a government service or over a public entity. There's a fine line between whether water supplies, and we face this with a lot of our programs that are federally funded. Technically, a water supply is a nonprofit. Technically, a MUD, a SUD, things like that are taxing entities, so therefore they fall under a different government code, but they are considered government entities, special districts under that clause. So do be aware of that as well as we look at them.
Yeah, well, I would think under our nonprofits, it would be public health and negative economic impacts in that order.
I concur.
And then any others to add to that one?
Okay, so you say in order to work with other, okay, so we've got county and other public entities, all of the SUDs, MUDs, drainage districts, et cetera, that's all covered under our first category. Okay.
You good with the nonprofits, public health, and negative economic impact, and stop there? I think that's pretty much going to be where it ends
Yeah, where would
naturally.
something like the COG fit? Would the COG fit under other public entity?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, moving on into private businesses.
I don't want to be negative, but I think I think they call them P3 loans, but the loans from the government that were basically forgiven for private businesses to help with their payroll during the pandemic, I think that was a tremendous help to private businesses, and I think they've already gotten all the benefit of that. So I mean, if you can, just give me an example of something that you would remember from our list, a request from a private business.
Actually, we brought a list with this, but.
That's not a problem.
Broadband?
Say, broadband
Broadband.
as,
Mark, you know what I've got an opinion is, and I've heard other commissioners and the judge say this, we don't want to pick winners and losers by awarding one private entity a bunch of money for broadband, but we do want to supplement and to offer assistance for any entity that would like to supply broadband in the county. So help me verbalize what I'm trying to say here, is I think broadband under government, in other words, under county government, how we would use that to help lay the pathway to get
Right.
broadband to the county is more important to me than to fund a private business and give them
Exactly. I'm not in favor of
I
funding
think that's
private
right.
business.
I think so too.
Makes
I think
sense.
that's,
Yeah, the only thing I would think of there is then I don't know of categories, obviously, I think what Commissioner Ford brought up with the P3 loans, but then there are other impacts that might be out there in the list. But the only thing I think of in privately owned business where we would have, I would be motivated to, oriented towards helping them would be on negative economic impacts specific to industries that were most severely impacted, hoteliers, restaurants, those types of things. And I don't know what's in there, but if there are other things outside of what we've already talked about with the P3 loans, then I'd like to consider those negative economic impacts, but I don't see anything else falling under there.
So we can add that, and again, when you look at them, if it does not fit the mold of what you had in your mind, of what your intent,
Right.
and what you're considering a need, you could still say,
Put a 0 in there.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to leave it open.
Yeah.
Open
Yeah.
to seeing the 48
negative
requests.
economic impacts.
Yes.
Okay. So anything else under that one?
I don't think so.
Okay. And then that brings us to individuals and households.
Well, I think public health. There are so many needs because if you look at housing, and I just pulled that out of the air, individual and household assistance, there are so many individuals, even the elderly and even middle income that need assistance in repairing some of the damage that some of the storms and have, so I think we need to go with public health.
And negative economic impacts. as well.
Negative, yes. And I don't know about community service.
Commissioner, I think this affects your precinct and mine, maybe more than 3, but what I'm gonna tell you is, we also have some areas out in the county that cannot be accessed during a flood condition.
Exactly.
And somebody would die if we
Exactly.
don't do something about that. So I almost think you could fit that under public health. In other words, where
And we
a subdivision wouldn't have access during certain
And we
times.
probably will, Commissioner. I'm just trying to
No,
think broad about
Be a
what we
little
could
broader,
include.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And then when we get to narrowing it down, I think we could easily do that.
Okay.
I might be too optimistic, but that's my thinking.
So hearing y'all speak of something individually, I want to throw this out there too. We don't have a request that applies to what you're speaking.
Oh, it does.
We don't have that right now. If that's something y'all want to see, now's the time to get that into us before we come next week.
Okay.
Don't forget, y'all can make the request just as easily if you identify a need. When Kimberly has the forms for that, if there's something that y'all want to see,
Well,
we took notes during our one-on-one meetings, but
We could probably fit that under county, other public entities under one of the categories there, because that would be something the county would do looking county-wide.
Or county service.
Is that still, does it fit
so
there?
government services.
Does it fit
It
government
could be.
services
It
under
could,
county
yes,
other?
we can fit it into that.
Okay. It'd be nice to have an assessment of what exactly those properties were, but I'm sure we can get those from,
Other.
Did I understand you say we
the
don't have
emergency
any
services
request
districts.
for, let's say, a subdivision or households that need help?
Well, what kind of help are you talking about? Like, I mean,
How about a culvert?
Well, but that would be under,
I had it in my head when you're saying that, like access
Well-
to emergency services.
No, I'm
That would
talking
be
about
under-
they can't get emergency vehicles in and out of there.
I would think that would be under infrastructure, water.
Well,
and-
then does
and-
infrastructure need to be also over there under individual and household?
Could be,
It
but I would consider that public health if you can't get to somebody that needs help.
Okay,
I mean,
Yeah.
under the broad category.
okay.
I think it'd fit under county other public entity, and we'd fit that under public health, which is our top priority underneath that
Okay.
one.
Okay.
And just,
Yeah, I mean-
but we don't have an assessment. Maybe we need to get with the emergency services districts and have them give us
An
a
assessment.
an assessment of
Yeah,
where those
yeah.
areas are. Because I know there's some folks in some places in precinct 1 that it's,
So much trip.
you know,
Oh, yeah.
you're stuck.
In a flood,
Yes.
you're sitting it out unless you
Yes.
could have life flight come in there possibly.
We've got, Joanne's.
I think
Well,
we'll just have
in Burleson County, when it floods, the community of Clay is completely cut
I
off.
know.
I mean, they can't,
I
people
know,
can't
and
get
I-
in and they can't get out.
I'm with you. You're right,
I mean, it's
Commissioner.
a whole community.
I think it really is gonna take us weighing each individual case.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't just say that fits and.
Oh, no.
you
Agreed.
know, So we're
Agreed.
gonna have to just take each individual case and get the information we can.
Just to be on the safe side, just to make sure everything can fit nicely in a box, should we add, I am actually in favor of adding the infrastructure, water and sewer, stormwater here then, since
Yeah.
that's the
I
Yeah.
think that's a wise
Right.
yeah,
choice.
I think
yeah.
so, yeah.
Right. I was thinking
Makes
about
sense.
that. Yeah, I know I have some places in my precinct.
You really do.
You need some wells and some lines and some.
Okay, now, that was the easy part. Do we want to at least start with some dollar amounts? So let's see where all the chips fall where they may and see how we want to shift things around next week accordingly.
Well, why not wait until we're discussing the projects themselves? Are you suggesting that we give a certain amount for each category? Is that what you're thinking?
That would be the best case scenario. It doesn't mean when we come back next week that this is set in stone, this is how it's being spent, but it gives you an idea of, again, we right now, oh, I'm sorry, you weren't here to hear. We right now currently have, I think, right at $144 million.
Over 140 million.
In requests for funding for this.
Sounds
month.
great.
So you're
Give everyone a
exceeding it,
third
though,
and we're done.
by $100 million. So
Each-
you've got
each-
44.
Well,
Each precinct
And
gets a
And once again,
third.
that would not be written in stone, it's just to try to get us a little farther down the road, so, once again, next week, we're gonna present all of this to y'all, every one of
Every
it.
one of them, you'll
The
see.
first thing we're gonna present to you is the county other.
Mhm.
If you assign a value across here with all the dollars, if these go over the dollar amount that's assigned, you know you're gonna be drawing from some of these others. So it just kinda gives you an idea of where you're at with the dollars. And is this important enough that we wanna take it?
So given all of that information, what's the targeted amount for each category if we use the 4?
That's where we're saying
That's
we
what
would be
we're
asking
asking.
you
As a
to
maximum,
identify.
I'm not talking about it.
Well, it's
yeah,
based on,
well,
you know,
and there are, you know, if we're looking at the 48 requests, but then we've also had some conversations where we've thought in our previous meeting where we talked about things that were other public county specific orientations and what our desires were for the county itself. So that's not included, none of that's included in the 140 million and the 48 requests, correct?
No,
No,
it is included.
Okay, it is.
Every request, when we sit down with y'all.
Okay,
y'all
so all the
request,
things we've talked about previously, as in our previous workshop session, if we talked about a topic, then it's included in that, and an estimated cost.
Yes, sir. And once again, some of
Okay.
it is exactly that, just
Okay.
estimated.
Okay.
best guess filler to get us there. So,
Super.
but every idea that y'all threw out, we were writing it down. They're part of
Gotcha.
the story yet.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies a lot for me.
And on top of that, all of them that are received internally or externally that have any documentation supporting that amount, that will be attached
Okay,
to the form. We literally have a
That's
form that
good.
we've created that's a request for funding. It tells you who requested it. It tells you the amount that's requested. It tells you how that amount was arrived. It tells you how it is eligible, and it tells you how it fits into one of the magic categories that we have here for you.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
Well, I didn't fill anything out
Right.
and put anything in, but
They
what I,
interviewed you, they talked to you.
but
they-
what I,
they
when I,
did that.
yeah,
Yeah.
when we had the conversations, I told you where my priorities were, so that's all included.
and it was noted.
Good.
And that's why some of the
Well,
categories that
that's the-
are
I-
eligible are not on here. There are things beyond this.
Yeah.
No one had any interest in a few of them. Now, I do want to also remind you, there is one that's not on here on purpose, that's not, that no one has any interest in necessarily, today. But there's also a public sector category that I think I did talk to each of y'all individually, that if we get down to the wire and we have a, say we've accomplished, I mean, again, I want to get into individual projects, but, priority projects A, B, and C, and D, and we have $300,000 left over, and we have 3 months to spend it. The easiest way to do that at that point in time is going to be to claim some payroll expenses. If this is just a capture a small, or even if it's just 3,000, that's hard to tackle, and find a project quickly other than payroll. So that's always going to be at the back end.
And
keep
it's
that
an
in mind.
option.
We're going to bring every penny you're allocated to the county.
Do we-
Nothing is going to be sent back. Nothing is going to be unused. We're going to find a use for it at the end of the day.
But you're
Sounds
saying
good.
the catch-all, if we get
It's
down to the
payroll.
wire time-wise, into 26, then the catch-all is gonna be a bucket that's payroll recovery?
Yes.
Okay, how big's that bucket?
Well, we don't know yet.
Is
It,
it-
it can be however large
That's
we
what
need,
she
but
said, whatever's
yeah,
left.
just whatever
Yeah,
the balance
whatever
is
is
at the end of the
left.
day.
Okay, there's no limit on,
Not at this time.
under the, recovery, under the treasury's rules or, our lost revenue.